Time now for an in-depth look at the market news this afternoon, and for that I'm joined on the line by Dr. Kim Sei-wan, professor of economics at Ewha Womans University. Professor Kim, thank you for making time today.
Good afternoon, Devin.
Well, the bill we just heard about from the U.S. Congress, $2 trillion in coronavirus relief, it's less focused on big business than the 2008 relief measures were, and it's meant more for households. Why have they decided to focus more in that direction?
That's because the origins of economic crisis is totally different between 2008 and this year, 2020's crisis. In the case of 2008's global economic crisis, it was generated from U.S. financial institutions like banks and insurance companies. So U.S. government provided liquidity to avoid bankruptcies of these big companies. But coronavirus outbreak is affecting every industry and company by enforcing people stay away from others. Particularly service industry is much affected, like restaurants, hotels, and sightseeing and so on. And we know that there are lots of small businesses in this service industry.
Well, Korea has its own emergency relief package, around $80 billion. Now, the effects of these measures, though, are not only local but global. What might those global effects be?
Of course, U.S. and Korean governments' prompt actions with huge injection of money to economy is a big relief to global community. In addition to these efforts, other major economies like Japan, Germany, UK, and many others are preparing a massive expansionary fiscal policy to save the economy. But ultimately, how long that bad economic situation goes on really depends on coronavirus disappearance.
Yeah, and speaking of the time frame, like the Fed, the Bank of Korea is promising unlimited liquidity for the markets. Never been done before, but they'll do it for 3 months and extend it if they need to. Do you think they'll need the extra time?
I think so. In the end, there will be extension of liquid supply from Bank of Korea until the end of this year. First of all, Bank of Korea's prompt action to provide unlimited liquidity is an effective measure to stabilize the economy and financial market. But in this time, the way of providing liquidity or money is kind of different from other times. As we saw from previous report, Bank of Korea decided to buy financial institutions like banks and security corporations, RP, repurchase agreement. Usually Bank of Korea only trades government bonds. And if the supply of liquidity is restricted in the next 3 months, and at the end of next 3 months, there is a high possibility that Bank of Korea extends repurchase agreements, liquidity supply.
Right. Well, today we saw Korean stocks were up, and overnight Wall Street was up for the second day in a row, the first time that's happened since February. What's the story in the stock markets today?
Until yesterday, there were 2 straight days stock market rise in U.S. Market. In the case of S&P 500 return, U.S. Market had 9.4% and 1.2% increase respectively until yesterday. This positive market is generated by the hopes on $2 trillion government emergency funding to business and people. And domestic market is kind of mixed today between KOSPI and KOSDAQ. And after having 2 straight days positive return until yesterday. So today's KOSPI decreased by 1%, but KOSDAQ increased by 2.1%. So in today's market, as usual, foreigners sold the stock and domestic investors bought the stocks.
Right, so Korean stocks mixed and Wall Street futures looking a little lower. But anyway, oil prices are up again for a fourth day in a row. It would seem this is at least in part in anticipation of the relief package in the U.S. What do you think is going to happen in terms of oil?
As we know, there was an over 50% oil drop in the last 2 months. But over the last 4 days, oil price increased by 2% in the case of Western Texas in a single day. And Brent oil price had almost the same price increase in the same day. I think the oil price recovery is pretty much supported by newly announced expansionary fiscal policies around the world and its generation of oil policy. So I believe that in the next months, oil price will be slightly and steadily recovered.
All right, Professor Kim, we'll have to leave it there for today. Thanks so much for coming on and sharing your insights.
Thank you very much for having me.